Welcome back to Tabletopped, everyone. This is Nick, your host, and today I am joined by three of the best in the tabletop biz. Why don't we introduce ourselves?
It's Big Rig Rio. Big Rig Rio Brown.
Big Rig Rio Brown. I love that.
Okay, everybody just turned off. Oh. It's me, Franco. Here, I'm hitchhiking on the side of the road.
Nice.
Can I take you someplace?
No, I'm protesting car culture. But I also need a ride. I'm conflicted.
You're in luck.
Just because I participate in capitalism doesn't mean I support it.
Luckily, I'm towing electrical vehicles, and he's in one of them.
No, this is a horse, sir.
I saw you plug it in. I don't know what you're talking about.
Hey, that's a rein, and I hitched it.
Oh, close one.
It's got a bit in its mouth. It's not a. It breathes.
I've seen double D batteries before.
What's your name, stranger?
Well, I don't think that's any of your fucking business.
Okay, cool.
That sounds about right.
Absolutely sure.
Yeah, electric cars are sort of like a fucking lie, kind of. You know what I mean? Because it's just sort of like, oh, it'd be great is how to reduce whatever. It's like, hey, it'd be even better is like fucking trains and buses and shit. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh yeah, let's get more cars out on the road and more heavy metals out onto the road and. Yep. More tire pollution because of all the scraps and stuff like that. No, okay. So this is anti-car corner.
Franco's deep in character.
Make your city walkable.
Yeah.
Join Tabletop today.
You should check out Paris's city planning. They are on the cutting edge of all this kind of stuff. But today, we're talking about a completely different topic.
Okay. We're not talking about pedestrian infrastructure today.
One quick second.
That might be a different...
All right, so we
took a little break to talk about conspiracy theories, but now we're back.
Which maybe it'll be on Patreon, probably not.
All I can say, that bird's not real, guys.
Yeah, the bird is not real.
Birds aren't real.
They haven't been real since the 70s.
Birds are dinosaurs?
I've heard that somewhere. Anyway, today we're going to talk about a specific subject that we were kind of talking about last episode in our game show, which is about who should be responsible for knowing and be knowledgeable of the rules of whatever game system.
I would love it if this episode appears before the game show.
That'd be really fun.
just completely.
Yeah, but that's fine because you, the listener, didn't have to know the rules.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, nice.
So, and I want to add on to like that previous conversation and talk a little bit more in depth because I think that it's like a huge point of tension in a lot of groups because there's different types of players that want different things out of games, obviously. And one, Mac, friend of the pod, he went to a conference last year called PAX Unplugged. His friend went with him and went to a conference.
Little-known conference.
Yeah, little-known conference. And they went to a panel called Shut Up and Take Your Turn, which is it was a board game panel about people taking a long time to play board games. And I was actually, over the Christmas break, was playing a game called Wormspan. If you've ever played Wingspan, it's just
I've played that.
Dragons. It's a little bit more complicated.
I played Wormspan. I mean.
Oh yeah, it's a good game.
Yeah, it was cool.
How long did your session take?
So I had to leave halfway through to play a Dungeons and Dragons game.
Okay.
But
the games are collapsing on themselves.
Yeah. I handed it off to somebody else, and they won.
Cool.
And so I was like, great. I'm glad I set you up for success.
Do you have a general idea of how long that game took?
I think basically it was the only game that I played while I was there. I think I was there for like 2 hours or so.
Yeah, so probably 3 hours.
Yeah, something like that.
Mine took 6 hours. Because of this very thing of like a turn would swing around and someone would take like 20 minutes.
I think we were pretty snappy about our turns, to be honest.
But I also think that is the big difference between different types of players. Some people want to get around and just like hang out with friends, chat.
All of us had just learned the game as well.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
so,
I was very frustrated.
Still very snappy about it. Oh, okay.
I literally would walk out of the room, have full conversations with people, and then come back into the room and be like, not even my turn yet. So,
I hate that for you.
Yeah, and so I wanted to kind of talk about this rule stuff, especially when it comes to TTRPGs. Because,
would you mind if I read the question that prompted
this? Yeah, please do.
So the quote was from, I won't say, well, I'll just say it. It's from 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons. In general, you can try a skill check again if you fail and can keep trying indefinitely. Some skills, however, have consequences of failure that must be taken into account. And this led into a whole discussion about, what the fuck?
having to know rules and
like
what
yeah.
the punishments and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, consequence, I think, more than punishment.
Yeah,
sure.
consequences. Yeah, the consequences of my actions. There's a really funny thing that happened at the last hunting of the boar. I don't want to blow up Jackie's spot, but we had I don't know if.
Oh gosh.
I don't think it was a disagreement. It was just sort of like I think this happens a lot sometimes in games, right? Where people will be like, "But I only did this," and I'm like, "Yeah," and then the consequence was this.
Yeah.
And it was just very interesting because Jackie's character. Basically did like a speak with dead type of thing on a corpse in front of that
Corpse of the king, by the way.
corpse of the king.
Yeah. While the princess was watching.
While the princess was watching,
Very
without
funny.
sort of like asking the princess or anything like that.
But did ask, what if you could ask your father one thing, what would it be? And then mocked doing the spell, much to the princess's.
No, well, the princess said, I wanted to know if he was proud of me.
Oh yeah. Oh, that was so sad.
But then on top of that, she feigned doing the spell.
She
do
didn't
the
even
spell.
actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
but she feigned doing the spell, and then she said, "Oh, this is what he said," and so like she actually pretended to cast the spell,
Right.
but then acted as if though she actually had cast a spell, and then repeated the answer to her as if though she had cast a spell anyway.
Yeah.
And so this disturbed the princess, and she ran out and called the guards and stuff. I don't know. I think it's interesting when there's like this disconnect between what a player expects and what a player doesn't expect, and I think I don't know.
Yeah, I've also found when I'm running a games is that players expect sort of a no consequence to stuff they do, or they expect to be in control of the consequence of what happens when they do
control of the
something.
consequence. Yeah, that's
That's
interesting.
It's like, no, your character doesn't get to control what happens to them when they make a decision.
We should definitely do a full episode on consequences.
I remember.
We're idea generating
this
in episodes
episode?
now.
Well, it's kind of. It's
it's
really
sort of-
more about the like knowing the rules as
Yeah,
well.
like
the rules.
how much can you be expected?
And what
of
are
your
the
players?
rules?
Yeah.
And like, are some of the rules are tacit and explicit? And then wait, does tacit mean not explicit?
Tacit, I thought meant explicit.
Yeah.
What's the not one?
Opaque? No, that's
Not
That's
tacit.
for like.
yeah.
Listen, I had an English major, and I know words really well, so I don't know what's right, and I won't pretend that I do.
But
Explicit and tacit are actually the opposite.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, so that's okay.
So you were right,
As I thought, I was right the whole time. Yeah, so there's like tacit rules, right?
Oh,
and
because
then
like taciturn. I'm an idiot, of course.
well, and then the thing that we were talking about in the game show episode too was Rio bringing in some rules that he knew from 3E when we were playing a 5E game, and just like taking 10, right, and being like, oh yeah, like if your character can do that and there's no consequence to taking time, then you don't need to roll a skill check and stuff. I don't know, Nick, what is this episode about? There's a lot of stuff to talk about here.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of different things. I think I want to talk at least first, and then we can just go into whatever. But because Rio, we've talked about this as well. About we've both been GMs at tables where like turns will swing around, and then people will be like, okay, let me decide what I'm going to do now that it is my turn, instead of like planning throughout a thing. And then we were also talking about how we decide immediately after we take our last turn, okay, I think I'm going to do this. You know, it's
I
like
think
very different.
What I enjoy is when players have an idea what they're going to do, and then they'll react on the fly to what's happening around them and move the story forward. What I don't like it is when a character stops the whole game and wants to have everything rehashed. That's happened since their last turn, and then try to weigh out their options. Like, I might do this, but what would happen if?
Yeah,
and I was like, you have no way of knowing what would happen if you do these things.
Yeah, and I think that this is like a perfect example of what I want to talk about is like how much, because we're both GMs, so when we get to our turn, we know how the system, like how things work and how we can make our own choices.
You have to pay attention the whole time.
Yeah, you have to pay attention the whole time.
Yeah.
And we can just sort of make our decisions as we go.
Rio's like, arguably, you all have to pay attention the whole time.
But then
you should be
for a player that
Ideally.
might not have as in-depth understanding of rules that we all do because we're GMs, like how much should be expected of them when it comes to a knowledge base of the game that they're playing.
And I think this is where I'm gonna set my flag on this side, is that the players should know the rules.
Okay.
If you're playing this game, you need to know how the things work. You need to know how skill checks work, all of the rules are in the player's handbook that get used, and I think people should come having read the player's handbook. It's not up to the DM to do all of the background work.
I have thoughts about this.
Okay.
But I also wanted to speak on what you guys were talking about. I think, like, when I am a player and it comes to my turn, right, like, I have an idea of what it's going to be, but oftentimes the situation will change. So it's important to pay attention, obviously. And then I think because of how 5e is, you have sort of variations on the theme of what you could have done on that turn, and you're kind of like, oh, if this happens, then I do this. If this happens, then I do this. And so you have a lot of these like flow charts and like variations that you can kind of like on the fly do. And I think that can be very sort of limiting, and also very like you are just thinking about the rules, and so you're only thinking about like what does my spell do here? What does my blaster do here? And it's like I think often it can, for some players or some tables, like restrict the sort of ability to improvise, like, oh, can I shove them off a cliff? Can I trip them? Can I whatever? Yeah.
For sure.
And I think a lot of times like that is sort of like, well, the optimal decision is not to do this thing because the optimal decision is to use my sorcery points to convert them to spell slots to use this on this. And like the optimal choice is this, and this. Like I've heard tell in sim tables that is considered rude to not play optimally. You know, there's like
I wouldn't say I would say you should know what your goals are.
Yeah.
And play towards that goal and you should know when your turn comes up how to move your character forward to that goal.
And so the thing that you were saying though, like that you don't like you Rio, that you were saying like you don't like when people ask like, oh, what would happen if I do this? But I think that if I like that type of thing when the game is more free flow and there aren't as many character options, because then, you know, you're kind of thinking like, well, what do I like? Could I do this to accomplish this? Like, could I like shove them or could I like
think we're talking
get
about
behind
different
them?
things,
We might
to be honest.
Yeah, it is a little different.
If you come to your turn like, oh, I want to shove this guy. How do I do that? That is a perfectly reasonable question. I'm talking about if I shove this guy. Is he going to? Will that be enough to kill him? If I shove this guy, how will other people react? It's like you don't know.
Yeah.
No,
I will help you work through the mechanics of your action.
Right.
But I don't think it's that you get to go. Oh, I shove this guy. Okay, you shove that guy. The guard next to him pulls his sword. Oh, well then I don't shove that guy.
Right.
Well, no, you already shoved him.
So okay. So it's like people trying to evade sort of the. Like trying to
shape narrative.
They want to make a decision based on
outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I that is really interesting. And Shade, I want to get your thoughts on the same question because we haven't flipped over to you yet. You are somebody who has, I would say, probably or maybe out of all of us, like an encyclopedic knowledge of like the D&D canon. Like you have all the books, you've read all of them.
Remember, he's just denying this so he can continue his 4D chess game.
He's shaking his head ruefully.
I'm just saying because
man.
I've played a bunch of games with you where I was like, I have no idea what this condition means, or what is this? Like, how do I do this? Like, how do you feel about this?
So I think that in terms of should a player know the rules, I am staunchly in support of a player knowing rules. However, I think that a player can buy in as much as they want. So I am not overly fatigued by someone who doesn't know the rules inside or out.
Well, let's say, okay, there's a level of knowing the rules.
Mm-hmm.
You come to the game, you've been playing for 3 years.
Sure.
You should know how a sneak attack
So this
works.
is interesting because like I was literally I saw someone on the D&D Reddit last night, subreddit last night, as I was doom scrolling my way to sleep. And
good for your dreams, good for rest.
Yeah, right, exactly. And they were talking about how like I've been doing this with my friends for 15 years or something, and I think I'm just done because there was so much like how does this work element to it, and I completely sympathize with that. And DM burnout is such a real thing, and you need to give yourself breaks. Should you know how a sneak attack works? Absolutely. I also think that at stages of your life, depending on what's going on and things like that, it's also perfectly appropriate to be like, oh, right, I forgot to apply sneak attack last time, or I forgot to take my bonus action, or something like that. And that's something that I'm not going to hardline about too much, because it's just like, oh, yep, and I can only monitor so many things. So like if I see someone is forgetting something, I might give a gentle reminder of like, oh, hey, don't forget you can you can use your bardic inspiration. That's something you could utilize here, and it might be helpful. And I think that's fair to do. But if they also, like later, and I think this happens a lot in our groups, where someone's like, oh, I forgot about this like extra damage source that I get, I'll fucking throw that damage source on. Whatever.
I think my problem with that, though, is just a mechanics thing. It's just a rules bloat thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it's like, oh,
I think there's a difference forgetting that you're supposed to do something versus to just not knowing how the game works after you've been
But that forgetting is very, very common when the rules are extremely archaic.
Yeah, and you're switching classes
arcane
and stuff like that. For me, like my personal way of dealing with that, because I would say out of the group of us, I understand D&D specifically, but just rules in general, the least. And the way that I kind of do it is like, if I'm like, oh shit, I didn't do this, I'm just like, I fucked up, and next turn I'll do it right.
Yeah, I prefer that type of vibe where it's just kind of like, oh, I forgot. I mean, like, it is what it is, you know, like, and it's kind of like, yeah, like
you
you're
can
not
adjust for anything that doesn't have a redoing of consequences.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I forgot to add my 6 damage. So he was actually dead this whole time. Well, no, you forgot to add that 6 damage, and he has made choices since then. We're not going to go back in time and kill this character.
Oh, we've still got 200 hit points left to chunk through? Sure, let's throw that onto the
I'll
pot.
add your 6 because we're in this fight for a while. I don't care if we want to, take a couple of hits.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I'm going to kind of throw out an example that I think is interesting based on the conversation so far, which is, what if somebody comes in and is like learning, maybe they're fairly new, they're not being malicious or whatever. One thing that I really enjoy is when someone has no understanding of the limitations of the rules and is like, so I really want to try to light this on fire, and I have like this stuff in my inventory. It seems like I could like try to do this. Like, how does that work in the game mechanically, or whatever? Like, can I do that? How do you guys feel about that sort of situation? Because it does slow down a turn quite a bit. It changes tempo, but I think that's great.
I think it's incredible. I think that's my favorite way to play.
I don't care. So because that character had a plan and they know what they want to do, you're just helping them figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
It's not going to that turn. The character goes, maybe I want to set this on fire, but maybe I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're just in combat too. So right now we're in combat, and I think because in 5e you just, and I guess 3e on and so forth, more modern play, it's it just becomes a whole little RTS game, a mini game attached to it, and you're just kind of okay, now we're gonna do this, versus it being I'm gonna set this on fire, I want to light this candle. It's okay, great, there are consequences to that, right? Now you have a thing that's on fire, what do you want to do with it?
Right.
And I think that's just more what I'm interested in, a new player in 5e, or playing a game that I would play, Cairn or something like that, or Merc Boar.
Yeah.
And you're just I have a bunch of junk in my inventory. Let's get creative. Let's solve problems. And I think obviously combat can be a problem to solve, and the solution doesn't always look like one side is dead. Sometimes it looks like I set this tapestry on fire and everyone starts getting sort of inhalation burns, and so everybody has to clear the room, and now we can all hide.
Y'all just went into a Pizza Hut, Hag Hut, recently, and you set a fire, and that's how you decided actually. That's what we're fucking doing with this place, and we don't want to engage with that anymore.
Rio, I want to dig in because I think that I've identified something in your sort of philosophy around it, where it feels like what you really want is not rules expertise, but at least investment. Yeah. So you want the player to invest and say okay, I feel I'm in this game with you, and I don't know how to do this. Can you help me with this? You're totally fine with that. Yeah.
It sounds like you really want an investment in the sort of reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation would not be you, the character being able to go 5 seconds into the future and be oh, he would have drawn a sword, I'm not going to do that anymore. Like that is not reality.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I think it can be difficult, right? That's like kind of table management. I don't think I've had players that do that type of thing. So,
so I'm gonna give one more sort of thing to talk on, and then I saw you write something down. I want to talk about what you were.
I already would talk about.
Oh, okay, great. One thing I want to talk about is how long does that grace period last? Because I feel like if I have
5 seconds.
if I have a player that does that and is like, I'm like, great, but I don't also want to play their character. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to tell them like, okay, then you do this, and then you do this, and then this, and that's what you're going to do on your turn. Because that always
like how
feels
they
bad.
do it is like they're just going to roll this to see what happens.
Right.
Is all I'm going to say. Oh, you need to use your ability here and there. Like, no, you want to set this on fire? What do you have?
Yeah. Right. And I think that like simply asking what is your end goal is always very helpful. Like I played with my parents a couple years ago, and it's really the first time they ever engaged with the game.
I was, as soon as Nick gave his example, I thought of your mom trying to open a hole into the earth.
That's exactly what I was thinking about.
So cool.
Yep, she tried to open a hole in the earth, and I was like, that is so cool, and it's not something that your level 1 character really can do with the abilities that are there, but let's figure out what your end goal was and
I mean, if you're
work
talking
from
about like
there.
a new player, say a new player has 6 months.
See, I mean, no, that's fine.
It's not that hard to read a book.
Yeah,
if
sure.
you're going to be playing a game
Hey,
every
for some
week.
people, it's hard to read. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, that's why I said 6 months. but it could be hard, but it's not that hard to
But
read
I also
what
think
your
that
character
to,
will do.
to Rio's point, though, like you don't even really have to read the book as long as you understand the functionality of your character sheet, and you can kind of pick that up by playing after 6 months. You know what I mean?
That's very very fair. I am 100% willing to kind of like figure it out and continue to work with it ad nauseum forever. That's fine because it does kind of shake the game up a little bit for me as well, because I'm going to have someone who's very dedicated to their sheet, knows every little thing and how to accomplish things, and is going to play therefore an almost a more mechanical gaming kind of investment, at least when we're looking at something like D&D in the modern era. Whereas if I have someone who, honestly, Nick, you're a really good example for this, because you constantly wanted to like climb things.
Yes.
Which really there just isn't
fucking monsters.
There isn't.
I didn't bring that up earlier.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know how to work it in. But
Yeah.
man, Bill Stabbins was constantly climbing things.
Constantly climbing
How do
things.
I climb this?
Yeah.
How do I stab it in the eye?
And-
how do I get there?
And like, I think that there is a level of I want to engage with that, and it really shakes up the game and the feel. Now, where I do think it can get into trouble. So my first time playing 5th edition was like, I don't know, within an 8-month period of it releasing. And it had been a minute since I had played D&D. I picked up Wizard immediately because I was like, I want that crunch. I want to really have some decisions. And
Should I play Warlock? I do not want that crunch.
well, and I had and you know, Tim, friend of the pod, was really nice to allow this to happen. But I forget what the spell is, but you can like fill a container with water. And I went ahead and said, does that goblin count as a container? And he allowed it to happen, and that goblin died gruesomely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that actually made me think of something, but sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, like, now, later, you know, it was very clear, like, we can't do that every time, because that's like an instant kill kind of thing. This is really fun for setting up. This is like session 1 of his game at the time. Really fun for setting up the vibe of your insane character.
And that's where you need to know the rules of improv and storytelling.
Correct.
You can get away with something once, but not every scene.
Correct.
Yeah, but why can't you get away with it every time?
Well, that's
you know
a
what
great
I mean?
question.
Because then,
And that makes the game bad.
no, but it's like, doesn't it like breaks something? I feel like if you're
does.
not able to fill that goblin up with water ever again, like,
Well-
I can only do it once. Like, why can I only do it
Well,
once?
yes, but I think then you need to then mitigate. So like that particular spell didn't have any saves associated with it. So like then you need to add some crunch and some guidelines and some rules for how we can achieve that every time without breaking the game. Because like
Are you counting that one time as, it was a lucky shot, that spell worked that way, that one time you tried to do
exactly.
it that way?
Yeah, the situation was correct in the moment.
I think you can also sort of for me in that sort of case, like when you cut Strahd's cord,
right?
I sort of was like,
basically the astral cord.
Yeah,
and it was not in a. It was in a Monster of the Week game.
And I was sort of like, I don't ever want to make my players feel like I had such a good idea. Oh man, like, well, I wish it had worked, but I guess it didn't.
Right.
So like, I want to reward that. If we had spent more time in that realm, and you were just like, okay, I'm just going around cutting all these cords or whatever.
Right.
It would, like, to Rio's point, it would have become not clever or interesting anymore. It would have just been boring. And so, like, I do think that there is a fine line between I always want my players to be able to use their things in a weird, interesting way because it's creative and that means they're invested. Going back to what you were talking about earlier, I don't want them to feel like they're gaming me. You know what I mean? Like they're trying to trick me.
And not to like, and it goes back to, and it's the only example I can think of right now. But you know, the books by She Who Must Not Be Named, the Time Turner.
That's the first time I've heard it.
Yeah, the Time Turner was only used in one book because if you brought that back in every book, so all the plots are
what
fixed.
a hack.
So you have to get rid of it.
Yeah.
It has to be this great clever thing that has to go away, and everyone
remembers
in the audience has to just all go, yes, this would fix it, but we've already used that.
Right.
We can't, use the holodeck every episode.
Yeah.
Right.
So the thing that you said, Shade, about the filling it up with water, filling up the goblin with water, putting rules around that, I think part of the problem for me is like related to the system. Because D&D 5e, that spell does not have a fail state, right?
Right.
It's just another little button that you can press.
But so that's interesting because it does have a fail state, and the fail state there is it a living creature? Yes, no. If it is, this doesn't work.
Well,
that's
a way.
Wait, is that how it happened?
Correct.
Or?
Well, that's the thing.
He just let you.
He allowed me to do it because I didn't fully understand these new D&D 5e rules. It had been a minute since I really done any D&D stuff.
Wait, but in the spell rule, it did say
it specifically says a container, and containers have like a
person is not a container.
Yeah, a person is not a container.
Don't we all contain multitudes?
Multitudes, absolutely.
But the way that I would have
too bad physics don't work on semantics.
Well, I feel like in that case, right, I would just say like, no, you can't do that.
Right. He could have, but I was new. It was our first, or new to this new edition.
And the rule
it was our first session.
Yeah, but it's sort of like.
You know what?
That's what we're saying. You can allow it once, but not repeatedly.
I would just never allow it. But also, I would like if I played a different game and then the spell was just like you fill up a container with water and it's like, can I do it on the monster? And it's like, yeah, but there's going to be some risk involved. So roll an extra whatever.
Right.
And then there might be a complication to whatever the spell is or something like that.
But also like if
there's nothing like that in 5e because there's no consequences to casting spells.
Right. Yeah.
There's no danger to it.
Yeah. And something Tim could have done, which I think would have been like a quick laugh at the table, and it could have been like a no. It's like, most living beings are tubes. You know what I mean? They're not containers; they're tubes.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so it's
I love that. Yeah, sure.
And so like,
you gave that goblin a good cleanse.
Absolutely.
But like, you could try to do something like that, I guess. But like,
I'm sorry, but I have to because it was in my head. It has to be in your head.
Yeah.
But I'm just imagining there's a goblin fight and you're casting it, and then just like two streams of water come from both ends of the goblin, and it just sort of like lifts him up off his feet for a second. And you see like geysers.
And what a great moment!
Like those like hydro shoes,
Yeah.
And okay, so
is that what they're called? I don't think so.
So one thing I want to kind of talk about then on the flip side is, what if you have a player that knows the rules really well? Like really well,
so,
maybe better than you understand the rules.
There's not possible.
Well, I mean, because you have the fiat, right? As the game.
Yes, exactly. Like Nick, I know all the rules to 5e.
Sure.
At this point in my life, and also if I don't, I can just refer to it. It's a reference point. Yeah. And then the other thing that I have is DM fiat, and so. That's it. So I think that player doesn't exist because there's no way that a player like that could exist because of how the game is structured. Unless you run a weird table, I mean, somehow a player can overrule you.
You should have and I'll always think about this, Rio. We weren't kind on this night, but we had
can't wait for this.
It was on our Curse of Strahd night, and
it was like 1,000 nights. For
okay,
that disclaimer works.
But it was our Curse of Strahd game where all of us understood that sneak attack worked a particular way.
Sneak attack debacle,
and you fiated that, no, I hear you all, but we're not doing this right now, because we were running ham on that hag, essentially. And
ham.
I've
never heard that, but I love
hag.
this. Yeah, ham hag.
ham hag.
Like a ham hock.
There definitely, it can create tensions. So I think you need to be ready to handle that tension. If it is something that could be referenced, either you need to say, well, hi, I understand that moving forward we can do this, but in this particular moment we're not going to go back, because there has already, and in that particular moment, and this is really where I want to apologize, it was realized kind of after the fact, we didn't apply, and some consequence had happened.
There you go.
Yeah. One thing I will say that I have taken to my new table and made it very clear in my session 0
I'm a new table. We're better friends.
just different friends. But it's what you once said on this podcast,
Never said
even
it.
Franco, when you were like, the way I try to run things is, hey, maybe I don't quite understand this rule. This is the way I'm ruling right now. Please send it to me. I'm going to look it up afterwards, and then next session maybe that's going to change. But right now this is going to work, and I love that. I love that.
Just keep it moving.
Something. Yeah, that's something that I read somewhere or heard somewhere. Or
I think that's the most important thing. That anyone know the rules, don't know the rules. Just keep the game moving.
Yeah.
No one wants to stop and have two people go about nitpicky details.
Yeah.
And another thing, though, I wanted to just, maybe we can use this to close out, is so at this conference, from my kind of talking to this person about the panel, was the sentiment of the panel was, some people just really want to just sit down. The game is sort of a thing that they leisurely kind of do, like, remember we're playing a game here, here's my turn, so how's your wife, or whatever. And it's much more about just the experience of being together. In like a game like Dungeons and Dragons, there are tables that are like, we're doing this mega dungeon, and like we're gonna like run through it, and it's not really about a story or whatever. It's just like, let's move from square to square, and they're playing it more like a tabletop like war game or something. And those turns can go on really long, because they're just like chatting with each other, they're joking, and they're just like, let me look through my book. I need to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing here, playing optimally at the table. What do you guys feel about that? Like, is that still like something that...
I think, again, we're going to the style of game. If you're doing a mega dungeon, then you don't care about the story. And you don't care about...
That's not true. What the hell are you talking about? What do you mean? It's just the place.
But I'm saying,
doesn't inform a way of play.
The way the question was phrased, that I'm understanding it, is the goal of this game is to just clear this dungeon using your adventuring party. It's not to be a collaborative storytelling. It's to be
I think it's still collaborative storytelling, because
it can still be if
the
that's
narrative
how you want
emerges
to play
from
it. But the way it was
the frame
presented was, it's just a war game.
Yeah, it could be like, and I guess this is the question for, like, you both just perfectly put the two sides of this kind of argument of like, no, it's still a story. It's still like something to invest in. It's still something that we have to pay attention to, and like maybe speed of play will still matter. And then what, Rio, you were kind of like going off the question of like, well, it doesn't seem like these people really like want that. What they want is sort of a leisurely, like, this is just an excuse to be around each other, but we're still kind of like doing it right. So like, as like, I personally wouldn't want to be at that table, just because
this made up table that nobody's at sounds terrible.
But like but people do like to play that way. So like, what would you say in that case about
I'd want to talk to whoever that is, because I've never heard of anybody playing like that in my life.
Really?
I mean, I guess I've heard of that like conceptually, but I've heard of that as like a player thing.
That's like the Gloomhaven games. We're going to play through this scenario.
Yeah.
And we're not going to be attached to these characters, because these characters are just here to apply the mechanics.
You don't have to. You don't have to not care about the story if you're not attaching yourself. But what does it mean to be attached to the character? Like, what do you mean by that?
Like, remember how you were talking about in Morkborg, how you were like, I'm having a hard time, like, or maybe it was you.
Oh, it's me.
Yeah,
I have like. It's one of the things that I think is an upward limiter for me for things like Morkborg or Cairn. I love those. Like, when we started to play the module the other day, remember, Jackie and Sean, like, immediately. And meanwhile, I'm, like, looking through every little thing about that character creator. And then everyone's like, are you ready yet? And I was like, oh, right, yeah, I got to do the thing. And as a result, I had a very different kind of attachment to the character. Still attached, but just... less so because like I didn't catch when I was like, okay, I hurriedly save the character and share it into the party. Oh, he's wearing rancid clothes? Fucking Christ. Yeah, I guess I'm attached to this guy.
Because, and so that would give a different experience of like, the rancid clothes guy got beheaded. Oh, okay, let me get back to the... Oh, no. Let me get back to the character creator. So I think that there is...
But aren't you invested in him getting better clothing?
That's a great goal, but
I think what we're talking about is like you're an RPG world and there's an RTS world out there.
Yeah.
And some people do want to play the RTS version of D&D.
Yeah.
I would say that even like at our table, everyone is pretty like has at least a portion of them that's RPG, but there is a section of them that I would say is more of that RTS, like that is more like made clear to them. Like I feel like there are certain players that we play with that come alive much more in combat rather than in like the social interactions. And so I think that it's interesting to me because if like how those people are kind of expected to know the rules really well because they really want to be optimal, to your point earlier about like it being
rude not to play optimally.
And so like I think that that's an interesting thing as well. But I also I think you kind of figured it out. Like you made a really great point of like
who's the you in that sentence?
Sorry, I was looking at Shade, but I was kind of thinking it was you.
Me, Franco.
Yeah, you, Franco. When you were talking about when you were talking about GM Fiat about people who know the rules too well, and I'm using sort of air quotes there. That kind of solves a lot of stuff because you're just like, hey, I'm the GM. We're playing my game right now, and like that might be the rule in the game, but right now we're playing it this way, kind of thing. I think that works really well.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on...
Swing that big stick.
No.
Anyone else have any thoughts on what...
Franco hates every phrase I've used today.
Yeah, it's true. You've said a lot of challenging things. I don't know. I mean, I think you can... I know this wasn't the topic, but you can definitely have a story... even if you have a nasty character with rancid clothes.
You can, and we're gonna talk about that in the next episode of Tabletop.
All right, everyone, if you want to get in touch with us, head over to tabletoppod.com. We have a contact sheet there. You can also go to patreon.com/tabletop and get cool stuff like our Wild Magic episodes, or you can join for free and you can get really cool things like a full module, The Last Hunting of the Boar. You should definitely download it, check it out, send us some feedback. We're developing it still. All right, everyone, we'll see you on the next episode of Tabletop. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.